I'm Priscilla Barrera with the Investing News Network, and here with me today is Joe Lowry of Global Lithium. Joe, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's nice to be back with you.
All right, so we are here at the Benchmark Minerals Week. We're at the end almost of 2019. To start, I wanted to ask you, looking back at this year, were there any trends in the lithium space that surprised you or anything that disappointed you?
Well, I'd say the disappointment and surprise are one and the same. And forgive my shabby dress, I just got here. I didn't expect the low end of the market to go as low as it did. And then I didn't expect it to be embraced as the story of the year in lithium, because what the low end of the market sells for is not the story of the year or the story of the decade, because the story is EV growth, storage growth, and the product that supports that is not the product that's selling for $7,000 a ton right now. It's the product that's still selling for higher figures, still lower than I thought. But yeah, I'd say the lower end of price and the fact that everybody just is fixated on that's probably the biggest disappointment. More of a disappointment than a surprise, but it's still a little bit of a surprise too.
All right, and you recently wrote an article mentioning that 2019 was sort of a gap year for lithium. So where do we go from here? What do you expect will happen in 2020? Will the industry continue to feel these growing pains?
I think the lithium industry is going to experience growing pains for the next decade because, for 40 years it was a pretty sleepy business that had just a few players and everybody knew everybody, and there was, not much change in demand. It was not an industry that was prepared for an industrial revolution and that kind of growth. And I think all the angst you're hearing in the commentary and, just all the stress in the market is just, it's going to continue. I mean, price may spike again and everybody may get happy and everybody may say, oh, lithium's, the greatest. And then, you'll have another dip and then everybody will panic again. So I don't think that that's a 2020, just a 2020 story. I think it's a 2020 to 2030 story because honestly, we're struggling to see how the quote unquote 800,000 to 1 million pounds of demand is going to be there in battery quality by 2025. But the real question is, if the next 3 years there's another 1 million tons needed, where's that coming from? Because we're not seeing the investment.
All right, and I'm just going to go back to prices for a second. Many people continue to ask whether we are at the bottom in terms of prices. Do you think we're there yet? And if not, how long do you think are we going to stay here?
Well, I'm never going to say I know we're at the bottom because that's a very tough question. I think we're very close to the bottom because as many people are writing now, even the pundits who are talking about oversupply all the time say, hey, people are now selling for below their cash cost, especially on the spodumene side of this equation. So that's unsustainable. So whether we're at the absolute bottom or whether that comes in Q1, what I would say I believe is that once we get to a bottom, it will stay there on the low end of the pricing until some of that excess inventory of spodumene and low quality materials are worked off. So you'll always see this kind of bifurcated market where you have the higher quality materials selling at 3,000 or 4,000 higher than the low end. But when that transitions, I've said publicly on expert calls and in my LinkedIn posts that I think by the end of next year, Q4 of next year, you're going to see prices start to go up. But I've also said that just means that we're going to stick here along the bottom or near, whether the absolute bottom isn't here yet for the next 9, 12, 15 months. So it's hard to call.
All right, and another topic I wanted to touch on was forecasting. So there's been a lot of talk about methodologies being used to forecast lithium supply and demand. What do you think is something that people miss when forecasting? And how do investors that I think are constantly bombarded by different forecasts, scan through the noise and look at the right variables?
Yeah, I think we have, as you said, a lot of different methodologies. Some people just say, look, all the announced gigafactory capacity. And, that's very appropriate to talk about here because Benchmark does a lot of tracking of that. There's two questions that come up with that is those projects are announced, but are they going to get built? And if they're going to get built, when do they get anywhere near capacity? So you've got nested interactive variables that make putting a forecast based on announced capacity very difficult. Then you have the people who say, well, the EV, look at VW, just name your car company. And they said they're going to have so many models and they're going to put so many billions of dollars into EV. Well, when does that actually happen? So I think there's consensus on the fact that sometime between now and 2025, you're going to have a spike with EV adoption. I think there aren't that many people who disagree with that. The question is it 2022 or 2024? And then if you pick a year, then you have to roll back your raw material sourcing so that the cathode's made and the cells are made. So I think it's just it's tough to call it. And I mean, I do it multiple ways. I take different growth rates. I talk, but like I'll go to Asia after here. I'll be talking to some of the leading cathode makers in the world, and I'll see what they say. And I've tended to do it based on that. But a lot of people like to just talk about what the EV guys say or what the battery makers say. So you can't make the cells without the cathode.
All right, and let's touch a little bit on the oversupply myth. That was something that we were talking about late last year and even beginning of this year. Would you say you were wrong about it, or what are your current thoughts about that oversupply myth?
I will say that when I talked about it, people took my statements, they weren't maybe nuanced enough. Because when I talk about this industry, I'm talking about the battery quality part of this industry. And I still believe that even more strongly today than the last time we talked about this, that the oversupply of precursor or spodumene has, and how much it's written about, has exacerbated the actual long-term undersupply of lithium chemicals, battery quality lithium chemicals. Because you've seen projects pulled back from, you've seen investments in juniors not get made. And when you look at the industry going from 300,000 tons this year, plus or minus, I'd say it's probably, in my mind, probably this year, the total demand's 315 to 320. But, pick a number between 3 and 320. When you think about between that number and going to 800,000, even if you take the low end of 2025, a lot of people still say 1 million, and it's got all the gross battery quality, and you're not seeing the projects that can deliver battery quality in those kind of levels. So I believe that the oversupply in the precursor is exacerbated what I still call the oversupply myth, because most people don't talk about lithium as one thing and don't nuance it to the low end of the market and the battery quality. And I tweeted last week about Japan and Korea and the fact that how much ahead of last year they are in their demand for carbonate and hydroxide. And that's the high end of the cathode market. And if that demand grows 30,000 tons just in Korea and Japan, and when everybody talks about this market now, it's China, China, and China. And 30,000 tons of demand is a real thing. It's 2 Orocobres. And I'm not sure why I said Orocobre, because Orocobre can't really supply that demand. But my point is that in the old days, a world-class lithium project was roughly 20,000 tons. Orocobre was supposed to be 17.5. They've never achieved that. So if they were able to make battery quality, it would take 2 of them. And when's the last time a new brine project came online? When's the next time a new brine project is going to come online? And if we haven't seen the beginning of real kickstart of EV growth yet, and we're still growing this much now, I think that the industry is going to have a hard time supplying even the 800,000 in 2025 for full battery quality.
All right. And one of the big themes, I guess, also in the space is the fact that we need more investment. And one of the recent news that we saw this morning actually was Palingurs and Traxys committing $2 billion into battery metal projects. I just wanted to ask you, what do you think are some of the challenges they will face when choosing lithium projects?
Well, I think that when you're just speaking lithium, I'm not speaking about the other battery raw materials. I think if you look at, and I know some people from Traxys. I don't know anybody from Pallinghurst, although a lot of them follow me on LinkedIn, or some of them follow me on LinkedIn because I have access to that information. I think if you look at their first foray into this business as being Nemaska, I think you have to really question their gravitas in looking at lithium projects. So I'll just throw that out there. I mean, I would love to see that level of investment, in lithium get their piece of it. But I think they're going to be challenged as what is open to investment. Because right now, pretty much the big four companies are self-funding this thing. And you can even bring Livent into that because Livent's number 5 and they have the ability to do Hombre Muerto. But it's the world-class juniors, the Thacker passes, Kachari, Lax Kachari's already funded, Neo, and I don't know when any of those are going to get funded, but I'm bringing up that point because I think when they talked about where they were, what their investment targets were, South America was not on that list. Is that correct? Okay. So I think if you're going to exclude the brine projects in South America, then you're really down to a couple of projects in the U.S. And if you look at the model in Australia and China, it's 2 investments because it's a mine in WA and a converter in China. And that has challenges too, especially if you're new to the industry and you don't know processing that well.
All right, and looking at lithium as a whole, do you expect to see more partnerships and consolidation in 2020?
Well, this is a very concentrated industry right now. And I think what I want to see, I won't even say I expect to see, but it's a Rio Tinto doing something more than dipping their toe in the water by reprocessing tailings from another asset and not a lithium asset. I would love to see either a big mining company or an oil company or an OEM make a major investment. And I don't expect too much more of the big guys, the Albemarle, SQM, Ganfeng, TNG, acquiring small projects. I mean, in the near term, I think that the next hurdle is to get, maybe one of these bigger companies. I don't expect the Chinese companies. I don't believe will be acquired, but you could have an acquisition of Albemarle or Livent, or some. I don't expect a business combination between those two, but somebody could acquire either one of them.
All right. And in the current state of the market and considering what you want or expect to see next year, how would you say investors should approach this season?
I would say that there is probably not going to be as good an opportunity to get some high quality lithium assets cheap as it is right now. And I think if you're confident in your ability to analyze future winners, now's the time to put money in. I mean, I think SQM was down 7% today, I think, or something roughly that. Albemarle is not at the low of the 52-week low, but it's pretty close. And that's just kind of the way it's been. And some of the best juniors are at very low levels. So if you believe in the theme, why would you wait?
All right. And you obviously receive a lot of questions from investor and market participants all the time. What is the question you receive the most, and why do you think there's such an interest in that question?
Well, the question I've received most the last 3 months is, are we at the bottom? And, I'm not a seer of the, I'm not wearing any kind of special hat that gives me the answer. I think people want to know, what will the sign be that we're at the bottom? And I think we're near the bottom now, but I'm not going to call the bottom. And I think really there's a lot of people that have been on the sidelines who want to know whether it's time to get back in. And I think this applies to both individual investors, and I think there's some hedge fund money that talked about lithium a lot in 2016 and was talking about making some significant investments, and then pulled back, and now they're kind of like, well, maybe it's the time now. So we'll see. Somebody's got to do it.
So my last question for you today, considering what you expect will happen in the 2020 decade, if you had to define that with one word, what would it be and why?
Dynamism, because I think that what we've seen to date in the last 5 years in the lithium industry is just the beginning. I mean, honestly, this industry is still like 300,000 tons. And if you look at going to between 800,000 and a million by 2025, and probably going to 2 million, for sure by 2030, maybe before that, and then say what's the map to get us there? It's pretty tough. I mean, look at the Atacama this year. I mean, listen to Albemarle's earnings call last week. What's La Negra going to do this year? I think they said 38,000 tons. That's not huge. SQM is still, they struggled a little bit with their expansion. If you take the whole of South America by 2025, I mean, you're not halfway to that number. And if you take the combination of what's happened in WA, there's a lot of spodumene capacity, but the problem that people don't get is that you have to match the raw material and the precursor with the conversion capacity. You can't just go buy on the spot market. There have to be matches that haven't happened yet to get us to where it's stable battery quality material. You can produce industrial grade lithium without, focus. But I think that we don't have the maturity now yet in the industry where all that capacity that came online in WA, go back and look at the original off-takers and see who actually did the offtake. So the industry still has to grow up, which goes to your other question of, how do I see this playing out? And I think there's going to be a lot more growing pains going forward.
All right, Joe, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right, once again, I'm Priscilla Barrera with the Investing News Network, and here with me today is Joe Lowry of Global Lithium.